Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another Supatease video. And it's been a couple of days since the start of Season 1 in Midnight, and I wanted to take a look at the statistical data and the analytics to see which specializations seem to be bubbling up to the top in competitive play when it comes to the solo shuffle bracket. They just released a little bit of class tuning and a little bit of bug fixes, but I don't think it's going to have major implications, at least in PvP. In PvE, it definitely will. But the purpose of today's video is to kind of look at why are some of the specializations struggling towards the bottom, why are some of them starting to dominate towards the top, and how can you personally benefit from this knowledge, basically. And if you want to make sure that you're staying up to date with news related to World of Warcraft, educational and entertaining content, then make sure to smash that subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. So we've got the Drustvar website open here. I'll have it linked in the description. It doesn't seem to be 100% accurate. For example, when I'm looking at representation to see where are all the range specializations, if you look at top 100, top 500, top 1000, maybe it's just because there's such few amount of players at the moment in terms of data gathering. It's basically the same data no matter where you look at the moment, but I was very impatient and I just wanted to see what the data was saying. I wanted to see like how on point was I with my predictions with regards to the meta and which specializations would be rising to the top. So I'm going to look at it today. We're likely going to do kind of weekly updates with this data to see how it's moving and see how the class changes that they apply to the game are going to be affecting it. But with the range DPS breakdown, we can clearly see that Marksmanship Hunter is dominating towards the top. It's the most represented specialization. I think the main reason for this is that it's very easy to play, very little keybinds. They've taken a lot of the utility out of the class, so it's just a big damage truck basically that runs people over during volley and true shot, which is very straightforward. Just aim shot, arcane shot with your cooldowns. Bam. Very simple formula, high output, and it's very effective at the moment. So I'm not very surprised to see that. It's something that's simple and strong. It's typically high in representation, and it's really fun on top of that. The fantasy of being an archer is definitely a strong one. Frost Mage is coming in at the second most represented specialization. I was anticipating Fire to be more dominant, but it is actually Frost that is leading the charge here. And I think maybe one of the reasons for that is that they have the double barriers, so they're a little bit tankier than the other mage specs. So obviously with Hunter representation this high, Frost being the tankiest spec and having a lot of crowd control and snares to be able to avoid a lot of the melee that are very popular at the moment when we get to the melee, I think is one of the main reasons for this. And they're still reasonably threatening during their Ray. They can get shut down by some compositions, so I was a little bit surprised to see it this high, but it seems to be doing fine. A lot better than Fire even in solo shuffle, although I do think if we get into 3v3 tournament format, I think that Fire and Frost would likely flip significantly here, but Frost is doing remarkably well. Destruction Warlock is third in representation, which I was actually putting it much lower. I put it like between B and A, I think, is where I was anticipating in terms of predictions. I thought it would be getting run down by a lot of the warrior enhancement shamans that were kind of coming up the ranks, but it's still doing actually better than Demonology, only by a small amount as far as representation. It's still very threatening during the Chaos Bolt window, but it does feel squishy in some situations. So I don't know if I feel like we're going to see this trend in a different direction as time goes on. But for right now in week 1, we're basically seeing like the big blast specs that have big one shots from the range DPS at the top, which is I think would be pretty common amongst kind of more like casual mid-level PvP, is just get on the guys that do a lot of big burst and have big crits on the screen in terms of popularity. Whereas Demonology is not about those big crits. It's about kind of this sustained, slow ramp. And even still, despite that, it's fourth in representation. So Warlock looking decently healthy regardless of the Enhancement Shaman buffs that came through that I think are definitely notable. Fire Mage coming in at fifth. I was kind of anticipating it to be number 1. But to be fair, that was with the changes that they were applying. And then they kind of rolled back on those changes. But I think it's still really strong, especially... But predominantly if you pair it up with like a high burst melee with a lot of stuns, it's very strong. But I could see it struggling with how many marksman hunters there are, especially shuffle, where it's less coordinated and you can't really like dampen and fatigue the hunters like you'll be able to in coordinated environments. So I do think that that's attributing a bit to why Fire Mage isn't doing as well in solo shuffle compared to some 3 versus 3 brackets, because it still has a remarkable burst damage. But I could see it being kind of scary into the marksmanship hunters in an uncoordinated environment. Devastation Evoker holding strong in the middle of the pack right here. Honestly surprised to see it tied with Shadow Priest, even given all the changes that came through for Shadow Priest. I was expecting Shadow Priest to kind of fall off a bit, and I was expecting Devastation Evoker to be climbing more towards the top because it's just so effective. It's a very strong specialization. It's very simple relative to Marksmanship Hunter, and has some advantages against melee that Marks doesn't actually have in those cases. I do wonder if this is like a class fantasy thing where Hunters is a better class fantasy than Dragon does at the moment. Maybe that's driving the popularity between the two of them, because obviously popularity is not just purely indicative of game balance right now. There's a lot of things to consider, but just because it's here in the middle of the pack does not mean that it's not remarkable. I think Devastation is phenomenal specialization. I do think that these bars, as far as the range DPS, will probably even out as time goes on. Shadow Priest definitely doesn't feel like it has the same type of punch than it had before, but it's not terrible either. It's a little bit more slow, takes a little bit more of a ramp to get through there. It's not going to be as chaotic as a lot of these like top end specs that can absolutely just crank you out of nowhere. But I think its durability is one of the main reasons why it's still holding steady here in the middle of the pack. It's just very tanky. Beast Mastery Hunter holding fine in the middle of the pack as well. Honestly, better than Boomkin, which was surprising. I was expecting a lot of players, in particular Boomkin, to be one of the best specializations in the game. I was expecting Boomkin to be quite a lot higher than this. But Beastmaster Hunter, I think, is still doing really well. Marksman's a bit outperforming again, like probably targeting some of the burst here and bringing down the burst is probably what maybe they're going to do. I don't know how much time they're going to allocate to PvP balance, given, with the Race to World first. Is it going to be a PvP tuning pass? Is it going to be a PvE tuning pass? Where's the focus going to be? We don't really know 100%, but I'm surprised to see it here. I definitely think it's more deserving of this representation, but I've seen a lot of new players also struggling on it in terms of survivability. I was expecting it to do better because I thought Death Knights and Assassination Rogues would be falling off, which are typically very hard specializations for you, and Havoc Demon Hunter as well. So I thought you would have a bit of an easier time if there's more Warriors and Rets, which it typically does do better into. So this is likely due to like maybe some defensive play. And it doesn't have the same type of burst that some of these top classes have. You kind of have to dampen a little bit at the moment. Drag fights on in order to succeed, but it's still doing well. Like anything in this range basically is a very healthy specialization and likely really good. Devourer Demon Hunter still doing very well. I was saying in the uncoordinated shuffle environments in my previous tier list, that's where I think it will excel because it does a very big burst. And if people aren't coordinated in denying it or mitigating it, then you can absolutely run away with games. So not surprising to see it, but I do think you're very weak into the Subtlety Rogue, and the Marksman Hunter burst is probably very scary in terms of defense, but you can definitely make it work if you were interested in going after Devourer. I think this Elemental Shaman representation is purely held up by Ascendance. It's a specialization where it's feast or famine. You either have Ascendance up and you're rocking people, or you don't have Ascendance up and you're tickle attacking in a pillow fight, waiting until you have Ascendance. And one of the main issues is that some of the specs towards the top, their cooldowns are like a minute to 30 seconds, like 30-second cooldown to a minute cooldown on their biggest burst, whereas you're sitting like 2 minutes to basically do the same thing. And I think that frequency difference between your cooldowns is one of the main reasons why you're trending towards the bottom. Affliction Warlock, I'm not surprised to see it trending down here. It's just a very challenging spec to play, not rewarding for how challenging it is to play. The buffs were nice, in the right direction. I queued into literally one Affliction Warlock. Was honestly surprised at how effective it was doing, but it's just too complicated, I think, as far as overall performance to see any like mainstream representation. It's just going to be like that niche Avlok player pick, and even the niche Avlok player pick, I don't know if they're a big fan of the mechanics that are implemented on it at the moment. Just having every one of your dots have a stacking mechanic, and it's a little bit much. The Dispel UA punish is more noticeable, but still kind of can be ignored for the most part, which can just completely strip your damage away if you get a full row of dots and haunt, which already took you forever to get up and max stacks, and they just press one Dispel. You just lose a huge amount of momentum. So it's complexity and its output being countered so easily, it's likely why its representation is low. Not that you couldn't make it work. Like I said, I saw one and it looked okay. Arcane Mage, I think one of the main reasons why Arcane is down here compared to Marks, it's just because Marksman Hunter is so high, and Marksman Hunter will just absolutely destroy you. Also, it's a lot more difficult to play than Frost or Fire, and to pull off effectively, mostly because your damage school is just very easily interrupted. you're pretty much locked into this barrage build at the moment with Orb, even despite the changes, and Arcane Missiles kind of got dedged at the last moment. So I think like core gameplay components of these guys, unfortunately, I don't think are meeting expectations for players in this bracket, and also their level of complexity is very high. So these things are likely attributing to a lower than ideal popularity rate. We got Augmentation Evoker holding it up. 3 guys still holding it up on Augmentation Evoker in the back. And this was just going to be the weakest spec, right? Its tuning was just abysmal. It just didn't have any output. It was basically like a pseudo tank spec kind of deal. It's not surprising really to see it here. It did get like a last second round of tuning, but even with that, maybe that's enough to get these 3 guys on here. But range DPS balance, definitely these guys towards the top end, looking a little more popular, probably in both strength and class fantasy in a lot of cases. I think the class mechanics of these guys and their viability is likely holding them back. And then some specializations are just super cooldown dependent, and without either their cooldowns are really long, so they feel useless for too long of a period of time. Or their cooldowns just aren't really adding a lot. Now, when we look at melee DPS, we can see a stark similarity. Retribution Paladin towards the top. Again, very straightforward, simple, and powerful. All of those together equal high representation. Also, Ret Paladin, I think, is a strong fantasy. So everything's working in your favor for Ret Paladin being at the top here. I think the bubble, the magic bop, and the lay on hands also buys you the ability to win in a lot of lobbies, even with wizards later into the game, as long as you can bank those cooldowns and then fire them off one by one in order to take down a solo shuffle. So not surprising to really see it the most represented. Even despite the nerfs, though, Unholy DK is second. It still feels very strong in shuffle, where I think you're going to see the biggest difference in balance is depending on if you want to focus on 3 versus 3 or you want to focus on shuffle. Because like if we look at 3 versus 3, you can see Unholy DK starts to fall off a little bit, and you can see Windwalker starts to take over. I think that's because you literally are directly countered by Windwalker, and at least in North America there are a lot of Windwalkers. I'm actually curious to see this on EU as well. Let's see for EU. So EU is basically the same, except Demonology Warlock falls off to BM Hunter, but pretty much everything else falling in line with that. It's just Demonology Warlock representation goes down a bit and Fire Mage goes up, honestly quite significantly between the two. I think it's important we look at both regions because sometimes there is some differences. And even on EU, right, Unholy DK falling a bit behind, but not terribly different between the regions. Hopefully it's not going to crash out on me. I know this website is kind of still in beta testing. We'll just press the reload really quick here to get into here. But when it comes to melee DPS, I was really anticipating Subtlety Rogue to be taking over, which I think honestly top 3 is still fair for it because it's still a rogue, and I think people are still intimidated just by the factor that it is a rogue spec. But this is the highest representation I think Rogue has had, and I don't even know how long. So it was effective what they did to it as far as reworking it, making it simpler. It's really strong with the 16-second diminishing return timer because you basically just rotate and infinitely stun everybody with talents that give you cheap shot when you vanish or dance guaranteed. So not surprising to see it up here, even though I think almost every tier is expecting it to be number 1. The Bonky Donkey Ret Paladin's just a little bit easier to pull off, so I think it's always going to be more popular. But this is a huge climb up for Subtlety Rogue. But Unholy DK, like I was saying, for 3v3 is because a lot of teams are playing with Windwalkers at the moment, and you just get absolutely hammered by them. So it's a little bit more lobby dependent for your success, but it's still really good overall in shuffle. So if you're a solo player, you'll still have a good time with it. Windwalker, again, you might be countered, depends on the lobby. A lot of ranged DPS, the Frost Mages and the Hunters, probably why we see these guys a little bit lower, even despite their damage output being very high. I would say Enhancement Shaman and even Havoc is doing very healthy. I was expecting Havoc to be very low. Enhancement Shaman is doing very healthy at the moment, really strong, but much like Elemental, a bit feast or famine depending on if you have your cooldowns up or not. I personally would prefer if they take damage away from the cooldowns, put damage into the baseline of the class, so that we're not just like cooldowns are up, oh my god, I'm freaking out, my whole team, I can't heal, versus just having a little bit more sustained gameplay, like I think was their intended goal. Enhancement and Ellie, I think, are some of the most egregious, but even Unholy DK and Ret's probably the top here because Wake of Ashes is the 30-second cooldown, it activates Avenging Wrath, and Divine Toll is a very low cooldown as well. And then Unholy DK with Soul Reaper. These cooldown-based classes are doing a lot in those windows of time, whereas like Fury has some cooldowns, but it's not as scary, and then Windwalker cooldown frequency is a little bit lower, so it's likely why it's a little lower, but it's also easier to kite. Havoc Demon Hunter, I do wonder how much it's just being propped up from Rain from Above, which is the fly talent where they just shoot fell lances down from the sky. I think that's likely propping this up quite a bit because I've seen it hitting for like 80,000 damage, which is a lot of damage. Because I was expecting it to be much lower than this with Subtlety Rogue and Marks Hunter and Rhett. So Havoc, this is where one of my predictions I think was wrong. Havoc is actually doing a lot better than I had anticipated. A bit curious to see what it looks like for 3v3. It's actually sitting in almost identically the same spot. Arms Warrior, hey, you guys passed Survival Hunter. You passed Feral Druid, Frost Decay, Acid, and Outlaw. Even despite everything before coming into this expansion, you're not at the bottom. Although we'll see for how long. This is, again, only just a couple days into the season. Arms Warrior, again, getting kited is the main issue. Damage output it's okay, it's respectable, but I think getting kited and kind of just getting blown up in stuns is the main problem you're going to have in the game at the moment. So not surprising. Survival Hunter, you guys just got nerfed, and then Marks is just so good. So again, you're just in this position where Marks is just so massively outshining you in terms of volume and output that it's going to be tough. There were some bug fixes for Survival Hunter apparently now. With Takedown, it's going to get your pet charging 40 yards away and I think get it out of roots or something. So you're going to be able to actually connect with your cooldown, but the numbers on marksman are just really high. So this, honestly, looking at data like this is probably like a good idea of seeing what it is potentially that they're going to nerf or they're going to buff moving into the following reset. I think that's what their schedule was, at least. Feral Druid, I was expecting to do better than this. Again, much like Arcane and Affliction, it's still the most challenging melee to play in the game relative to Outlaw Rogue. So its representation is usually going to always be lower unless its output justifies its complexity. And I don't think you get the same amount of output as a Ret for your effort, right? Like a Ret, you put 1 out of 10 effort and get 5 out of 10 results. Feral Druid, you put 10 out of 10 effort and you only get 3 out of 10 results. So it's like you got to put way more in and you don't get as much out. And usually that calculation in players' brains will dictate whether specialization is going to be lower or higher representation. So we do see it a little bit lower on the lower side here, but I think it's still, like I said, like it could have maybe used a couple of the buffs that they did to it for PvE, not all of them, but maybe like a couple of those buffs could have helped it up a bit, because it is very challenging to actually pull off, but it's not terrible. Frost Decay is honestly doing better than I had anticipated. I was expecting Frost to be, maybe not. Maybe this is about where, but I like overall representation relative to Rogue at the bottom, I think is actually not too bad just based off the first 2 days. Its damage outside of cooldowns maybe still negligible. I think it is still very cooldown dependent class, but much like Marks, you pop those cooldowns, you blast, you get a kill. There you go. It's similar to Enhancer and Ellie, where the cooldown window is the main thing that's driving your success. So I do hope that they shift damage away from cooldowns and into sustain with this one. But it's not doing as bad as I had thought. I thought it would be a little bit lower than this. Assassination Rogue, not surprising. You were the only class really that got a significant nerf on your burst relative to all these other guys. Like all these other guys, I think, did more damage with their burst, and your burst has a longer cooldown, and it's easier to counter. And it takes more to set up. So like they just hated you guys going into this patch or something. I don't know. Like they went immediately after your King's Bane burst. Nope, not allowed. Even though like all these guys do the same amount of burst on a lower cooldown, and it's easier with no ramp, and they don't have energy starvation problems. Like Assassination just had like core gameplay issues with energy regen, didn't get addressed. Burst got nerfed. You got like a minor compensation of like 4% damage overall in a patch where Subtlety with this DR change is negatively impacting your Garrote and significantly benefiting Subtlety Rogue with a cheap shot reset that you don't get. So you just run out of steam. They came after your one thing that was good. It's really not surprising to see it down here. And then Outlaw Rogue actually got just only buffs, and it's still the least represented specialization. And again, I think it's because it is the most complicated. Even despite their best efforts with simplification, it's still more complicated than every other melee DPS in the game. And then you have to take that calculation of how much effort for result. You got to put a lot of effort for not as much result as some of these other guys, right? The bonky donkeys just push the button, result, HP bar moves. Outlaw Rogue is like HP bar never moves. So it's a lot of output with not a lot of results, which is the main issue for it. And I think, again, Subtlety is just massively out of control with that talent that resets cheap shot at the moment, and with the 16-second DR, that it's just going to massively outshine and outpace Outlaw Rogue at the moment. But Assassination has like some core gameplay fundamentals, I think, that need to be addressed. Otherwise, I think it's just going to be at the bottom for a long time until they basically are. And then finally, the healer balance, which was the one that I said was the most important moving into this. Not surprising to see Mistweaver towards the top or Disc, even though they were the ones that received the most amount of nerfs towards their damage output, but they're still damaging DPS. So I feel like that's something that's going to be looked at. The overall throughput on Mistweaver is just really high. I played it for like a couple of games yesterday, and it's just like, wow, the healing output is insanely high. Like, just everything heals a lot on the specialization. Some stuff's nice. It's streamlined. I like the new passive Jade Totem just going down automatically for you, but like you can just banana beam and run around corners and laugh at everything, and then Fistweaver run people into the dirt. So it's not really surprising to see these guys so high. They just have so much output. They're a DPS and a healer basically together. Holy Paladin coming in a little bit lower. It has good burst, but not good overall damage, I think is the main difference here between this, especially in Solo Shuffle. The Hammer of Wrath hits really hard, but everything else just kind of doesn't do too much damage. So Holy Paladin comes in a little bit lower, but I think Holy Paladin also has really just good tools to deal with these high burst melee in a lot of cases, especially the subtlety rogues, with Blessing and Protections and Divine Shield immunities. But even Holy Paladin can run over and a stun really fast, whereas Disc is a little bit more of a durable healer. You're not really going to get attacked too much, but these guys are trending towards the top because their damage output is so high on top of their healing output. Holy Priest in a healthy margin, great position, simple, easy healer to pick up. Probably not going to be targeted for nerfs either. So like this in the long term is probably a good one to go after. Restoration Shaman, this is another one where I think predictions, I might have been too harsh on it. I played it yesterday. You do have to work for your wins though. You do have to work. However, you can get good lobbies where it's like multiple casters and you do well in those situations. Even though I think I said that in my tier list, but I still ranked it as the lowest rated healer. But it can keep up. It is a struggle. Honestly, Resto Shaman to me is like, they hit their goal with this one. They weakened the cooldowns. You have to cast, you use your mana. Like they actually, like Resto Shaman is actually just well designed, but next to these healers that are just so egregiously powerful and running you over, but basically not casting and doing as much damage as DPS, they make you look weak. But in reality, I think like Resto Shaman should be considered the baseline for design. We should bring down the strength of the cooldowns, strip out some of the damage from these guys, and then it would actually be a very fun game in that environment. So you either that or you just buff their instant healing, and then we just put them in here. We're basically playing the War Within again, where it's just all instant cast. Cooldowns are very important. You can go that route. There's basically two routes here. You either do that where we buff all the instant healing on the lower represented healers, and everybody's just crazy, and we're just playing War Within, really fast-paced gameplay, or we bring down the damage out of these healers. We bring damage out of the cooldowns, put it into the baseline class, and try to take the game into a new direction, which is what I was honestly hoping for. Preservation Evoker, I'm surprised to see this low. I was expecting to see higher than this. I'm a bit curious if in the EU it's any different. It's actually not. It's actually identical. Maybe actually Disc Priest actually takes over a little bit over Mistweaver Monk. But Pres Evoker is very low considering the buffs that it got. I was expecting it to be a bit higher than this. It's a little bit more complicated with echo mechanics. Like there's a lot of just like correct order of operations you got to go about compared to a lot of the other healers that are a little bit more straightforward or direct. And it's the other thing we'll note with these healers at the bottom is that their damage output is like next to 0 in 3v3. It's very hard to even if you do manage to, you still not even come close. These guys heal from their damage, you guys don't, and you do less damage. So it's like you just really can't compete in terms of the overall value and output at the moment. But I was surprised to see it this low. I was expecting it to see somewhere in here, maybe a bit above Holy Priest. Again, maybe it's fantasy with Dragon is lower that's driving that. Maybe it's a complexity layered in there as well. Because Holy Priest is way more straightforward and more bang for your buck. Just direct healing, bam, you know what it's gonna do and how much you're getting out of it. Whereas Preservation cooldown's a little shaky for recovery. So it's a bit of a rougher spot. Resto Druid, not surprising to see it falling pretty heavily. It's just got nerf because of Mythic Plus. Wasn't greatly compensated. You were actually nerfed the most on your damage, even though your damage was the most irrelevant, which was very surprising. Outside of like very niche, low-rated 2v2 examples, I feel like it was very strange to go after, especially all of Resto Druid's damage, and not just specifically like Feral Frenzy or Convoke or something like that. Like targeting Wrath during Tree and targeting Moonfire, which were just like negligible damage output, was a bit strange to me. So to me, it's like the healer balance is like the biggest one. They went into it very light-handed, which is like slaps on the wrist towards the top end. Except Resto Druid, you guys get hit pretty hard, it seems. And then not a huge amount of compensation. I do notice the Healing Tide buff on Resto Shaman, but the rest is not really. If you try to play Totemic, I've noticed you just run out of mana really fast, and people just run out of your totem. So it was not a great experience for me, to say the least. But to me, they've got a big decision, which is, Are they just going to buff these weak guys, give them more instant healing, and buff their cooldowns again? And we're just playing War Within, where it's cooldown trading and really fast, like kind of one-shot reactions, because that's currently where we're at, except some specs are bad at it, so they're going to be played less. Or are we going to take the damage down and take cooldowns, the effectiveness of cooldowns away, which will require, I think, a lot more. Like, we're leaning closer to it would take less changes to just buff these guys and basically make the War Within meta again. It would take more change to go the opposite direction. But I think the opposite direction is fundamentally the better direction. So I guess we'll kind of wait and see where we're going to go overall. Are we going to follow the same path that we have for the last few expansions? Or are they going to have the time and be able to achieve the opposite, which was the direction I was hoping we were going to go for? But that's the breakdown of it. I hope you guys enjoyed the discussion. Thank you guys very much for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one.